Long before England had a church, before it had a king, before it even had a name, there was Canterbury, a Celtic stronghold on a river crossing in the southeast of Britain, where every power that ever shaped this island left its mark. The Romans built a city here. A monk sent by the Pope made it the spiritual heart of England. A king's fury turned it into the most famous crime scene in medieval Europe, and centuries later, bombs fell from the sky to try and erase it from the map. This is not just the story of a city. This is the story of power, faith, and the cost of standing in the way of both. This video uses AI tools to visually reconstruct what Canterbury may have looked like across the centuries. The images are based on historical engravings, archaeological records, and written sources. A few visual details may not be perfectly accurate, but our goal is to bring this extraordinary city back to life and let you walk through its streets as they once were. The people who first settled this landscape left no written records. But archaeologists have found their traces beneath the modern streets: stone axes, thousands of years old, Bronze Age pottery, and the remains of a fortified settlement surrounded by 3 deep ditches. By the time the Romans arrived in 43 AD, this was the capital of a Celtic tribe called the people of Kent, a community who had migrated from northern Gaul and already traded with the Roman world. The Romans captured the settlement and gave it a new name, roughly meaning the stronghold by the alder grove. Over the following decades, they transformed it. Grid streets replaced winding paths. A stone theatre rose in the centre, eventually rebuilt into a massive structure seating around 3,000. Public baths, temples, and a marketplace followed. Wealthy families built homes with mosaic floors and underfloor heating. Watling Street, one of the great Roman roads, ran directly through the town, connecting the ports of Dover and Richborough to London and beyond. By the late 3rd century, the empire was under threat. Around 270 AD, the Romans built a defensive wall around Canterbury, stone and flint up to 6 meters tall, enclosing over 50 hectares, with at least 5 fortified gates. For a time, the walls held, but when the legions left Britain around 410, the town collapsed. Trade stopped, buildings crumbled, the population scattered. For almost 2 centuries, the greatest Roman town in Kent was little more than empty walls and overgrown ruins, waiting for someone to give it purpose again. In 597, a monk named Augustine landed on the Kent coast. He had been sent by Pope Gregory the Great with a single mission: convert the pagan Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. The King of Kent was already married to a Christian princess from the Frankish kingdoms, which made his court the ideal starting point. Augustine was welcomed, the king converted, and Canterbury, still sheltered behind its old Roman walls, was chosen as the seat of the First Archbishop of England. An abbey and a cathedral were built, craftsmen arrived. By 630, gold coins were being struck at a Canterbury mint. The small ruined town was reborn, not as a military outpost or a trading hub, but as something rarer, a centre of spiritual authority. Within a century, the Archbishop of Canterbury held power over the entire English Church. But geography made Canterbury a target. Close to the eastern coast, the city suffered devastating raids from Danish invaders in 842 and 851. Worst came in 1011, when the Danes besieged the city for 20 days, burned the cathedral and captured the Archbishop. When he refused to be ransomed, they beat him to death. And yet, Canterbury endured. When William the Conqueror arrived in 1066, the city surrendered without a fight. Its people had learned that survival mattered more than pride. The Normans rebuilt Canterbury. A new cathedral rose in stone, grander than anything the Saxons had imagined. And in 1162, King Henry II made a decision that would define this city for the next 4 centuries. He appointed his closest friend and Chancellor, Thomas Becket, as Archbishop of Canterbury, expecting loyalty. Instead, he got defiance. Becket transformed overnight. The man who had lived in luxury now wore a hair shirt beneath his robes. He refused to let the king control the church, rejected royal courts over clergy, and fought Henry on every front. By 1164, the conflict was so bitter that Becket fled to France, where he spent 6 years in exile. He returned in December 1170 to cheering crowds, but within weeks he excommunicated 3 bishops loyal to the king. Henry, furious, reportedly cried out for someone to rid him of this priest. 4 knights crossed the Channel, rode to Canterbury, and on the 29th of December struck Becket down inside his own cathedral. The reaction was immediate. Miracles were reported at his tomb. In 1173, the Pope declared him a saint. The following year, Henry himself walked barefoot through Canterbury in penance, and the city was transformed. Pilgrims flooded in from across Europe by the thousands year after year. The shrine of St. Thomas became one of the richest in Christendom, encrusted with gold, silver and jewels offered by the faithful. It was this tide of pilgrims that inspired Geoffrey Chaucer in the 1390s to write one of the most celebrated works in the English language, a collection of stories told by travellers on their way to Canterbury. The city had become more than a place. It was a destination, a symbol, a story that all of England shared. But even sacred cities are not spared. In 1348, the Black Death reached Canterbury. The city that had grown to 10,000 souls, the 10th largest in England, was devastated. By the early 1500s, barely 3,000 remained. Then came a blow no plague could match. In 1534, King Henry VIII declared himself head of the Church of England. Within 4 years, his officials reached Canterbury with orders to destroy the shrine of St. Thomas. The king saw Becket not as a martyr, but as a symbol of resistance to royal authority, exactly the kind of story he wanted erased. In 1538, the shrine was stripped bare. The gold, the silver, the jewels offered by centuries of pilgrims, all seized for the crown. Becket was declared a banned saint. The monastery was dissolved. The pilgrimages that had sustained Canterbury for nearly 400 years stopped overnight. The city could have died. Instead, it was saved by strangers. Protestant refugees fleeing persecution in France and the Low Countries began arriving in the 1570s. They were given the Cathedral crypt as a place of worship. Services in French are still held there today. By the 17th century, these refugees made up as much as a third of Canterbury's population, and their silk looms had replaced pilgrim coins as the engine of the city's economy. But peace did not last. When the English Civil War reached Canterbury, Puritan soldiers stormed the cathedral. Stained glass was smashed, statues destroyed, the organ torn apart. Canterbury had survived Vikings, plague, and a king's fury. Now it had to survive its own countrymen. In 1830, a steam locomotive called Invicta pulled nearly 300 passengers from Canterbury to the coastal town of Whitstable, the first regular steam-hauled passenger service in the world. The city that had once drawn pilgrims on foot was now connected to the age of machines. But a century later, Canterbury faced something no wall or railway could protect it from. On the night of June 1st, 1942, German bombers appeared over the city. This was not a military strike, it was revenge. The Royal Air Force had destroyed much of the medieval German city of Cologne, and in retaliation, the Luftwaffe targeted British cities chosen specifically for their cultural heritage, selected from a German tourist guidebook. Canterbury was on the list. Over 100 high-explosive bombs and thousands of incendiaries rained down. 800 buildings were destroyed. 43 people lost their lives. The medieval heart of the city burned. But on the roof of the cathedral, 4 men, civilian fire watchers, worked through the night, spotting and extinguishing incendiary bombs as they fell on the ancient stone. 16 bombs landed nearby. The cathedral survived. Canterbury had been attacked by Danes, gutted by kings, ransacked by Puritans, and bombed by a modern air force, and every time it came back. Today, Canterbury Cathedral, St. Augustine's Abbey, and the Church of St. Martin, where a queen prayed before England even knew the name of Christ, stand together as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. 14 centuries of faith, conflict, and reinvention. Still standing, still telling its story.